Imagine two men with the same age, the same testosterone, and the same healthy lifestyle. One keeps a full head of hair for decades. The other starts losing hair in his 20s. At first, that seems unfair. But the answer is not simply stress, shampoo, or bad luck. Hidden inside the scalp, there is a tiny biological message being delivered again and again. That message is called DHT. And here is the strange part. DHT is not a poison. It is not a disease. Your body actually makes it for a reason. So why would a hormone that helps build the male body also seem to attack the hair on the head? To understand this mystery, we need to stop looking at hair loss like hair simply falling out. In most male pattern hair loss, the real story is not that follicles suddenly die overnight. The story is slower, quieter, and much more interesting. A thick hair becomes slightly thinner. Then the next hair grows weaker. Then the next one grows shorter. Over time, the follicle acts like a factory that is slowly losing power. The machines are still there, but every new product becomes smaller than the one before. So the real question is not only, why is hair falling? The better question is, why is the follicle making weaker hair in the first place? How DHT works. DHT stands for dihydrotestosterone. That sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. Your body starts with testosterone. Then an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase changes some of that testosterone into DHT. Think of testosterone like raw material, and 5-alpha reductase like a machine that transforms it into a stronger message. DHT then travels to cells and attaches to something called an androgen receptor. A receptor is like a lock on a door. When DHT arrives with the right key, it can tell the cell what to do. In some parts of the body, this message is useful. In others, it can cause problems. And this is where people often misunderstand DHT. DHT does not attack every hair on your body. In fact, it can help grow facial hair and body hair. That is why the story seems so confusing. The same hormone connected to beard growth can also be connected to scalp hair loss. How can one hormone do opposite things? The answer is that follicles are not all the same. A beard follicle and a scalp follicle may both be hair follicles, but they do not read DHT's message the same way. It is like sending the same email to two different workers. One sees the message and starts building faster. The other sees the same message and slows down. On the scalp, the most sensitive follicles are usually in the temples, hairline, crown, and top of the head. But the hair on the back and sides of the scalp is usually more resistant. This is why male pattern hair loss often follows a pattern instead of spreading evenly everywhere. If DHT was simply poison, then all scalp hair would be affected equally. But it is not. The pattern itself gives away the secret. The problem is not just DHT existing in the body. The problem is how certain follicles are genetically programmed to react to DHT. The Big Misunderstanding. Think of your genes like an instruction manual inside the follicle. Some people inherit follicles that are calm when DHT arrives. Other people inherit follicles that overreact. In those sensitive follicles, DHT can help trigger a process called miniaturization. Miniaturization means the follicle gradually produces thinner, shorter, weaker hairs. The hair does not disappear all at once. It shrinks through repeated growth cycles. A strong terminal hair becomes a thinner hair. Then it becomes even finer. Eventually, it may become so small that it is barely visible. This is why early hair loss can be hard to notice. You may still have hair in the area, but the quality of the hair has changed. The scalp becomes easier to see. The hairline looks softer. The crown reflects more light. People often say, "My hair is still there, but it does not feel the same." That sentence is important because it describes miniaturization perfectly. The factory has not completely closed, but it is producing weaker material. Now this raises another question. If DHT is the problem, why do some men with normal hormone levels lose hair, while others do not? This is one of the biggest myths in hair loss. Many people think male pattern baldness means you have too much testosterone or too much DHT in your whole body. But that is not always true. The key issue is often sensitivity. A person may have normal hormone levels, but their scalp follicles may be highly sensitive to DHT. It is like sunlight. Two people can stand under the same sun. One person gets barely affected. The other burns quickly. The sun is the same, but the skin responds differently. This is why blaming yourself for hair loss usually makes no sense. Hair loss does not automatically mean you did something wrong. It does not automatically mean you washed your hair badly, wore hats too often, or used the wrong pillow. In androgenetic hair loss, the main story is usually genetics plus hormones plus time. DHT is the messenger. Genes decide how loudly the follicle hears that message. Time allows the effect to build slowly. The science. But here is where things become even more interesting. DHT does not usually make hair fall out like someone cutting a rope. Instead, it changes the environment around the follicle. The growth phase of the hair cycle can become shorter. The resting phase can become more noticeable. The follicle can become smaller. Each cycle produces a weaker hair. Imagine a tree that gets less and less energy each season. The first year, the branches are strong. The next year they are smaller. Then the leaves become thinner. The tree is still alive, but it is not producing the same growth anymore. That is what miniaturized hair is like. This also explains why hair loss treatments work in different ways. Minoxidil is often described like fertilizer. It does not remove DHT from the scalp. Instead, it tries to support growth and help follicles produce stronger hair. Finasteride works differently. Finasteride targets the enzyme that converts testosterone into DHT. In our analogy, if DHT is water leaking into a room, finasteride is not a towel on the floor. It is more like turning down the leaking tap. Dutasteride works in a similar direction, but it blocks more forms of the enzyme. This is why these treatments are discussed so often in male pattern hair loss. They target the hormonal side of the problem. But this does not mean everyone should immediately take a medication without thinking. Hair loss treatment is personal. Some people respond well. Some people respond slowly. Some people may experience side effects. Some people may not be good candidates. That is why a dermatologist matters, especially before using prescription treatments. The goal of understanding DHT is not to panic. The goal is to understand the battlefield before choosing a weapon. Another misunderstanding is the idea that you must destroy DHT completely to save hair. That is not how the body works. DHT has roles in the body, especially in male development and androgen-related functions. The goal of medical treatment is not to make the body useless. The goal is to reduce the signal enough that sensitive follicles are under less pressure. Think of DHT like volume on a speaker. For resistant follicles, the volume is not a problem. For sensitive follicles, the same volume is too loud. Treatments try to lower the volume so the follicle can function better. There is also a reason DHT blocking shampoos and miracle oils create confusion. Some products use the phrase blocks DHT because it sounds scientific and powerful. But the real question is not whether something says DHT on the label. The real question is whether it can meaningfully affect the biology inside the follicle. Hair loss happens below the surface, around the follicle and its signaling environment. Washing the surface of the scalp is not the same as changing the hormonal message inside the follicle. That does not mean scalp care is useless. A clean, healthy scalp can matter. But scalp care should not be confused with proven DHT targeting treatment. So what does the science actually show us? In androgenetic alopecia, the follicles and balding areas tend to be more influenced by androgens like DHT. DHT is made from testosterone by 5-alpha reductase, and it binds strongly to androgen receptors. In genetically sensitive scalp follicles, this can contribute to progressive miniaturization. The result is the pattern most people recognize. Temples moving back, crown thinning, and the top of the scalp becoming weaker while the sides often remain stronger. This is also why hair transplants work the way they do. Surgeons usually take follicles from the back and sides of the scalp because those follicles are more resistant to DHT. When moved to the thinning area, they often keep much of that resistance. This is called donor dominance. The follicle carries part of its behavior with it, almost like a worker transferred to a new office but still following the old instruction manual. This does not mean transplants are magic. The surrounding native hair can still miniaturize. But it shows again that the follicle's genetic programming matters. Practical takeaway. Now let's make the practical takeaway simple. DHT is not the enemy of every hair. DHT is a hormone message. In people with androgenetic hair loss, certain scalp follicles are genetically sensitive to that message. Over time, those follicles can miniaturize. That is why the hair becomes thinner before it disappears. That is why the pattern matters. And that is why early treatment often works better than waiting until the follicle has been weak for many years. If you are trying to understand your own hair loss, look for the pattern. Is the hairline changing? Is the crown thinning? Is the top getting weaker while the sides stay strong? Are individual hairs becoming finer? These signs may suggest miniaturization. But not every hair loss problem is DHT. Shedding can also come from stress, illness, poor nutrition, medications, scalp disease, or other causes. That is why guessing can be dangerous. The pattern gives clues, but diagnosis gives clarity. The most important idea is this. Hair loss is not just about hair falling out today. It is about what kind of hair the follicle is able to produce tomorrow. If DHT-sensitive follicles keep receiving the same signal, the factory may keep making smaller products. But if the signal is reduced early enough, and growth is supported properly, some miniaturized follicles may improve. Not always. Not perfectly. Not for everyone. But this is why understanding DHT changes the way you think about hair loss. Because DHT is not a monster chasing your hair. It is a messenger. And in the wrong follicle, with the wrong genetic instruction manual, that message can slowly turn thick hair into thin hair. Once you understand that, hair loss becomes less mysterious. Minoxidil, Finasteride, Dutasteride, microneedling, and transplants all start to make more sense. They are not random treatments. They are different attempts to solve different parts of the same biological puzzle. Because every answer leads to another question. In our next video, can miniaturized hair actually grow back, or is there a point where it becomes too late? The answer might completely change the way you think about hair loss. If you don't want to miss it, subscribe to HairLab Explained. I'll see you in the next video.